How did shaking a barometer lead to an electric light? And how in the world did they get an electric light way back in 1705? That's almost 100 years before the invention of the battery. Well, I'll tell you, and along the way I'll talk about an unfortunate king, his slutty son, a mean and cheap boss, an abused assistant, the first static electricity machine, and a very influential experiment. Ready? Let's go.
Electricity, 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 electricity.
This story begins in 1649. In that year, the King of England, Charles I, was beheaded by radical Protestants, or Puritans, who were upset with him for trying to dissolve Parliament. His son, also named Charles, ran off to France for sanctuary. 11 years later, in 1660, the Puritans were defeated and Charles II returned and was instated as the King of England. Charles was invested in undoing the strict and restricted rules of the Puritans. He supported the arts, science, and every attractive loose woman in London. He was infamous for his many mistresses. Anyway, one of Charles II's first acts was starting a science club called the Royal Society. In 1687, the Royal Society co-produced Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, which made him a scientific superstar. 25 years later, Isaac Newton was elected president of the Royal Society, and he decided to hire an assistant to run weekly demonstrations. Unfortunately, Newton had a small problem. He was famous, but he was also notoriously prickly, cheap, and mean. Luckily for him, he found a talented experimentalist willing to put up with him. Francis Hawksbee was from a lower-class family that made their money selling cloth. No one knows how Hawksbee began doing demonstrations or how he caught Newton's eye, but we do know that 1, he was very good at doing demonstrations, and 2, he constantly reminded everyone that he was undeserving, unworthy, and uneducated. This combination of scientific skill and obsequious behavior inspired Newton to hire him as his assistant. However, he never paid him enough to live on, with a salary that depended on how good his demonstrations were, or as Newton put, as a salary as he deserved. Not surprisingly, Hawksbee was pretty desperate to find some inspiring demonstrations, which he mostly did with vacuums. Then in 1703, he heard an intriguing story from France. 25 years earlier, a French astronomer named Jean Picard had moved a mercury barometer, a mercury tube used to measure air pressure, in the dark, and the vacuum at the top produced a faint glow. When Picard carefully shook it up and down, it glowed even more. Hawksbee did everything to kick it up a notch. He correctly deduced that it was the mercury vapor in the top of the barometer that was glowing. So he then added a splash of mercury to a glass tube and evacuated out all the extra air. And when he shook it, it glowed. He then put that glass tube on a spindle and spun it, sort of like a rotisserie, and then it glowed even more. It glowed even brighter when he put his hand on it while he spun it, with a curious purple light. He quickly deduced that by putting his hand on it when he spun it, he was creating static electric charge, and thus he created the first electric lamp. It took over 230 years to make a commercially viable fluorescent light bulb, but if you look at it, it is strikingly similar to Hawksbee's original sphere. Like Hawksbee's original, fluorescent lamps use a splash of mercury inside an evacuated glass tube. There are 2 major differences between a fluorescent lamp and Hawksbee's globe. The first is, of course, fluorescent lamps tend to use electricity from the wall or from the battery, and Hawksbee's use static electricity. However, you can get a fluorescent bulb to flicker dimly without plugging it in, just with static electricity, just like Hawksbee did, by rubbing it with cotton or balloon or rubber or fur. My favorite way to do this is to use Saran Wrap. See, Saran Wrap gets charged up when you unwrap it, which is why it clings to the surface of things. If you then wrap the end of a fluorescent bulb with Saran Wrap and squeeze it, the fluorescent bulb will flicker like this.
Cool, huh?
The other big difference between fluorescent lamps and Hawksbee's tubes is that fluorescent glow white and Hawksbee's glowed purple. That is because mercury mostly glows in the ultraviolet range, which is invisible. We see the visible end of the light produced, which is purple. Fluorescent bulbs are therefore coated in phosphors, or fluorescents, that glow white when hit with ultraviolet light. That's where the fluorescent bulbs get their names. While making the first electric lamp, Hawksbee simultaneously made the first static electric machine, as rubbing a spinning globe can create a lot of static electricity. 40 years later, a theatrical self-proclaimed wizard used Hawksbee's device for a series of dramatic electric demonstrations, like using sparks to light alcohol on fire, electrifying silverware at dinner parties, and even charging up pretty girls and giving them electric kisses. Hawksbee tried to use his machine far less dramatically to study static electricity, with little metal strips wrapped around it, but it just confused him and he moved on to other studies. 8 years later, Hawksbee died from unknown causes, and Newton went on to cheat his widow out of any money owed to her. Hawksbee's globe might never have been used to give electric kisses to pretty girls if it weren't for the motion of a single feather. In fact, all of the advances in electricity after Hawksbee, from the lightning rod to the battery, radio, telephone, television, lasers, and on and on and on, all of them were triggered by a single event on May 1st, 1729, where a single feather moved in an odd way and a man named Stephen Gray noticed it. And that story is next time on The Secret History of Electricity.
Electricity, 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 electricity.
Hi, thanks for watching. Remember to give me a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you didn't like it, accidentally give me a thumbs up. Have a good day.